Hello, today is Wednesday, January 24th, and welcome to episode 289 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI's Deputy Executive Director, Jessica Jones, and I'm joined today by NSI Senior Fellows Les Munson and Morgan Vina. We are today returning to our regular scheduled programming and taking a break from our very fun NSA on the Ground series. But if you haven't heard it, please check it out. It's the last 2 episodes, and if you liked it, you're in luck because we're gonna be doing more of that. But today we're going to be discussing news that came out yesterday about Turkey's parliament voting to approve Sweden's NATO membership bid. Though we'll have to wait, of course, till Turkish President Erdogan actually signs the protocol into law. This comes after months of delay. Both Sweden and Finland applied for NATO membership in May 2022, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Finland kind of spun out ahead of Sweden and ended up joining NATO back in April 2023. Hungary and Turkey were the last two holdouts when it came to Sweden's accession. With the movement in Turkey, Hungary is now the only member state that has yet to ratify Sweden's accession. But yesterday, it also hit the headlines that Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban sent a letter to his Swedish counterpart inviting him to Budapest to discuss Sweden's accession into the NATO military alliance, which may indicate a break in Hungary's resistance. It's worth noting that Orban has also long promised that Hungary would not be the last NATO member to ratify Sweden's bid. So maybe he's just trying to get in at the last moment. For its part, earlier this month, Sweden reactivated part of its civil conscription. It's planning to send 800 troops to Latvia early next year to reinforce NATO's presence in that country. And to kick off the year, Sweden's Minister for Civil Defense stated that there could be war in Sweden, which made the headlines for all but a couple minutes. So first, Morgan, I'm going to turn to you. Turkish President Erdogan has made it pretty clear that Sweden's NATO membership bid is linked to the purchase of F-16 fighter jets. What do you think of that position? Are we getting the U.S. getting the short end of the stick here?
So I think that the F-16 deal is definitely an important part of Swedish membership. I do think that Turkey's parliament approving Sweden's accession to NATO is a step in the right direction, but it's not the end of the story here. This F-16 issue is still outstanding. Of course, it requires the approval of Congress. I think Erdogan is incredibly fortunate and has quite good luck that Bob Menendez is no longer the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He would have certainly held that up or would continue to hold that up for as long as possible. There's clearly no love lost between Menendez and Erdogan. However, with the new chairman, Ben Cardin, I think he has signaled a willingness to discuss this with the administration. No decisions have been made yet. The notification hasn't been sent to the Hill. But I think clearly Cardin has stated as well that, Sweden's accession to NATO is just one of the many issues that they're looking at when it comes to the F-16 deal. Cardin is a robust human rights advocate and has said clearly that this is going to be an issue that he takes a look at. Clearly, Turkey has used F-16s in Syria against the Kurds. They've also stationed F-16s in Azerbaijan. And we saw what happened with the war between Azerbaijan and Armenia over Nagorno-Karabakh. So I think Turkey is definitely a complicated partner, particularly given the 10/7 attacks against Israel. So as well as what we see going on in Greece. So this is a very multifaceted issue. The F-16s are likely going to go through. I would be very surprised if we see the sale scuttled, but I do think it's something that we need to be very careful about in terms of moving forward with our future relationship with Turkey.
Yeah, Les, in addition to kind of Turkey's recent relationship with NATO and the rest of the countries in the alliance, NATO is also hosting. What's your thoughts on that? But NATO is also about to host or is hosting its largest military exercise since the Cold War, 90,000 troops. Russia not happy about that, of course. Or, is the alliance kind of poking the bear a bit with these exercises and these votes in accession of Sweden?
Well, I think there's these are all fascinating topics. There's a lot of stuff that this development implicates. probably the most important one is for those of us who are concerned about the rivalry between Sweden and Norway, and I'm a Norway supremacist. We've had it good over the Swedes for a long time. They weren't part of NATO, and Norway's been a stalwart ally. It's going to make it a little more complicated now that Sweden's going to be coming into NATO. So maybe that kind of competition is good.
So if you didn't know that before, Les is the steadfast Norwegian supporter over here. So please
yes, I am.
watch your comments on the boards.
Despite my Swedish genetic material. But I think also very illustrative about the limits of Russia's actions and this kind of axis it has with Iran and China. There is great concern in Europe about Russian aggression in Ukraine and the potential for it to spill elsewhere. And so to be able to keep Turkey on side, and Turkey's interests have become much more complicated as it has become a bigger player in the Middle East and in Eastern Europe and in the Mediterranean. There's a whole bunch of conflicts that Turkey's involved in. Our interests do not always perfectly align with them. Our values certainly do not always align with them. But the fact that Turkey is staying within the NATO structure here, and positively so, although there's been a lot of hand-wringing about it, is a major development and very indicative that in the long run, the West remains in a very advantageous position. Also, just politically, it's good for the Biden administration. President Biden campaigned on emphasizing alliances, particularly NATO. This is a feather in his cap in this election year. I expect him to be using it out on the campaign trail as things go forward. So for those folks who, we're kind of talking about this in the last couple of podcasts, who don't think voters care about foreign policy or that that's not part of an election process, it is. Voters do care. They notice this stuff. It's going to be relevant. It's certainly going to be a conversation between the two big candidates as we go forward here. So I think this is a really important development. I'm glad we're talking about it. There's a lot going on here.
Well, speaking of the upcoming election, we also see Ukrainian President Zelensky inviting former President Donald Trump to the country. After statements President Trump made that he could end the Russia-Ukraine war in a single day if he was returned to the White House. I mean,
yes, but which day will that be? Will it be a day in 2029?
Who knows, right? I mean, what do you think, the alliance European counterparts are thinking about this upcoming election? I mean, obviously Zelensky is worried, has stated that he is, those statements, former President Donald Trump's statement makes him worried, right? I mean, do we, what do our partners think? Is the conflict going to continue to weigh on American voters as they go to the polls?
Well, I'll go real quick, Morgan. Whatever people think of Trump, and I'm highly skeptical, but this is a primary. His rhetoric has been designed to win over the Republican base. The Republican base is more skeptical of the Ukraine support than I would like, but that's where they are. He's been emphasizing that as we shift to, and if he ends up becoming the nominee, and I don't think it's totally over yet, but if he ends up becoming the nominee, I do expect him to shift more to the middle. I think that's, a lot of people are thinking he'll continue with this crazy rhetoric, appealing to isolationists and that kind of thing. I'm not so sure about that. I think he's going to shift to a more moderate tone. So I think folks, smart observers abroad, are kind of waiting to see the pivot to the general election campaign before they make too many judgments.
I will note that the former president's rhetoric on Ukraine is incredibly worrisome. I actually, Les, I don't necessarily agree with you on this one. I actually think he's pretty adamant that U.S. support for Ukraine will contract significantly should he be the nominee and then go on to win the general election. I will note that while U.S. allies and partners were incredibly concerned during the last Trump administration, there's continued reason for their concern. We saw a significant amount of pressure put on our European allies and partners. I think that was a good thing, but I think Trump has doubled down since he left office, and the indications that U.S. support for the alliance would continue, I think, is severely in jeopardy should he be the nominee.
Well, we've got some predictions that we may have to test later on. Okay. Thanks so much. That's a wrap. Thank you to Devlin, Bernie, Claude Jennings, and the entire NSI team for their help in producing today's episode. Join us again on Friday, January 26th, my birthday, for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security and foreign policy debate shaking up America. We're now on YouTube, so check us out there. And if you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.